Good morning, Rosedale Rizzos. I'm going to read a book to you today by Lynne Cherry called The Sea, the Storm, and the Mangrove Tangle. There's a word in this book called propagule. We're going to learn about what a propagule is. The sea, the storm, and the mangrove tangle. Over a shallow, salty, tropical sea, a flock of pelicans flew around a mangrove island. And there you'll see the bird that is a pelican. And here you see the mangroves. They grow right in the water. From the branches of this tangle of mangroves dangled long sprouting seeds called propagules. As a pelican landed, it jostled a branch and a propagule fell into the sea. For weeks, the propagule was carried by a strong current until it came to rest on the shore of a faraway lagoon. There are the pelicans and the mangroves, and here's the propagule that was knocked away. It's a seed from the tree. For it took root, sprouted leaves, and began to grow. For decades in the hot Caribbean sun, as tides rose and fell, it slowly grew and sent out prop roots to help it stand. By its 50th year, its vast network of roots anchored the little mangrove tree, allowing it to survive storms. It was now quite a distinctive tree. Boys and girls, that took 50 years to happen. A mangrove tree crab scuttled by and exclaimed, "How can a tree grow in this salty sea?" She climbed the seedling to eat its leaves and made the mangrove her home. Mangrove oysters, sea anemones, and a coral settled on the roots. Small fiddler crabs dashed and darted about below the high tide line and disappeared into holes under the mangrove's roots. A periwinkle tree snail came upon the mangrove seedling and thought, "I can eat the algae that grow on these roots." So it stayed on to live there. Mangrove leaves fell into the water, decomposed, and turned into muck. In this muck, seagrass began to grow. Look at all of those organisms that decided to make the mangrove their home. Several more years passed and the mangrove tree became larger, sending out more branches and prop roots. It grew flowers that were pollinated by the wind. Driftwood floating across the sea carried anole lizards to the mangrove tree. "We can eat the ants, mosquitoes, and other insects that crawl and fly over these flowers," they thought. Hummingbirds hid their nests within the mangrove's tangled branches, while a caterpillar and the mangrove tree crab nibbled on its leaves. That little population just keeps growing. After the mangrove flowers dropped their petals, propagules formed. These living seeds grew long and heavy until they fell down between the mangrove roots into the seagrass. These new propagules began to grow. A seahorse carried its babies in a pouch in his belly. "Here is a good place for my babies to hide," he thought, and gently released them into the seagrass bed. Mama shrimp and fish laid their eggs there. Grunts and mangrove snappers fed in the seagrass at night, and during the day hid from bigger fish among the mangrove roots. propagules grew into many mangroves. For 70 years, this mangrove tangle grew and spread out farther and farther. Dolphins found the water around the mangroves teeming with fish and decided to stay there. Manatees came to feed on the grass, and they too made the waters around the mangroves their home. There's a sea turtle and manatees and dolphins. 70 years this has been growing. A 100 years had passed since the first propagule planted itself here, and the Mangrove Tangle had become a big mangrove island. As a flock of pelicans dove for fish, 2 fishermen came by. One said, "Let's cut these mangroves down and create a shrimp farm." The other fisherman replied, "But these mangroves are the only trees that can grow in salty seawater. Many of the fish in the ocean start their lives in nurseries around these mangrove islands. If we destroy the mangroves, we destroy the fish, which give us all life." And so they went out to sea and left the island in peace. Oh, thank goodness. Because that took 100 years to get to be that big. And for all those fish and sea life and birds to make it their home. Two pelicans tucked themselves into the mangroves and thought, "Here we can build a nest and dive for fish." Herons came to hunt for shrimps and crab and small fish, and a magnificent frigate bird puffed up its large red pouch to impress its mate. That's up there. Here you have pelicans, all the different birds that decided to make this their home. One afternoon, a pelican flew to the mangrove island. Breathlessly, she cautioned, "Beware, prepare, a storm brews. A wild wind blows this way." She called to the creatures of the air, "Come, hide deep within the tangled branches of the mangroves." The manatees lifted their noses in the air and sniffed. Yes, there was that sweet, damp scent of rain. On the horizon, they saw far away plumes of rain descending from a raft of dark clouds. A hurricane was on its way. The seahorses called to the other creatures of the sea, "Come with us beneath the roots in the center of the mangroves. We will be safe." So they swam, crawled, scurried, and slithered into the shelter of the mangrove roots. Put it down there. That evening, the breeze became a screaming tempest. Thick, dark, frothing clouds raced through the sky. "The hurricane is here," the animals cried. Winds sang and moaned through the mangrove tangle, lashing, breaking, and tearing branches. The birds held on, fighting the power of the hurricane throughout the night. Under the sea, the sand churned as huge waves tossed and turned the fish and seahorses trying to rip the mangrove roots from their hold on the sea floor. The next morning, all was still. The sun shone from behind the retreating purple clouds, and a mangrove propagule floated away on the current. The birds came out from the safety of the mangrove's damaged branches. The periwinkle tree snails timidly peeked out from their shells and looked around. The fish, the crabs and the seahorses swam out from the protection of the mangrove roots. All were safe. Meanwhile, the mangrove propagule, blown by the storm, came to rest on the shore of a faraway lagoon. Ten years have passed. Dead, bleached branches still tell the story of the hurricane, but new growth has sprouted from the mangrove's broken branches, and the mangrove island is even bigger, wider, and deeper. Now, while pelicans dry their feathers and dolphins jump, roll, and play in the waves, and manatees lazily loll in their grass bed, while a heron hunts in the shallows, and a hawk screeches. The mangrove propagule, carried on the waves to a faraway lagoon, has now grown into a little mangrove tree, and there it will continue to grow, grow, and grow. The end. The Sea, the Storm, and the Mangrove Tangle by Lynne Cherry. I hope you learned all about propagules today, boys and girls. Have a wonderful afternoon.